Welcome to a world where silence hides daggers, trust becomes a battlefield, and the people closest to the heart become the sharpest source of betrayal. Here, every family dinner reveals a new wound, every polite smile masks a deeper deception, and every secret whispers a truth darker than the last. This channel takes you inside stories where parents dismiss sacrifice, husbands hide alliances with their own families, and loyalty is twisted into manipulation. Behind every gift lies an insult, behind every favor a hidden cost, and behind every shared glance a conspiracy waiting to explode. If you're drawn to shocking family secrets, heartbreaking betrayals, and revenge that rises slow, silent and unstoppable, this is your home. Prepare to step into stories where truth destroys illusions and justice hits harder than betrayal ever did. The evening began with the kind of silence that pretends to be peaceful but hides blades underneath. Plates were set, cutlery placed with the usual formality, but there was a tension in the air thick enough to taste. The parents exchanged glances that carried unspoken judgments, and the husband kept adjusting his sleeves, avoiding every eye as though trapped between truth and exposure. Everything looked normal, yet something in the room waited to break. The moment arrived faster than breath. A simple comment, just a casual remark about the long hours spent working, the effort poured into supporting everyone, was met with a cold, clipped voice from across the table. The mother leaned back, eyes narrowed with disdain, and announced that nobody in that room needed any money being brought into the family. Not the parents, not the husband, and certainly not the daughter who had spent years giving without hesitation. The words weren't loud, but they struck with devastating precision. The father nodded as though agreeing with an obvious fact, one that had been discussed behind closed doors, sealed with whispers and judgment. A warm smile dropped from the husband's face, replaced by a tight, uncomfortable smirk that betrayed more truth than he intended. In that second, something slipped from his expression: guilt, fear, or maybe the weight of a secret too heavy to keep held down any longer. It wasn't just a rejection. It was erasure, a declaration that every sacrifice had meant nothing. Every bill paid during their struggles, every time a late-night shift helped cover an emergency, every moment of support given without complaint, all dismissed as if worthless. The air in the room shifted, turning sharp with hidden intentions, and a realization slowly formed like storm clouds gathering in the distance. The parents weren't merely ungrateful. They were rehearsed, their tone, their confidence, their certainty. It wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Each comment they made sharpened the edges of the betrayal. Statements about family independence and unnecessary help felt like well-practiced lines. And with every word, the husband shrank deeper into his chair, eyes darting from one face to another, trying not to reveal how deeply he was entangled in what unfolded. Then came the moment that cracked everything open. The mother, with a too sweet smile, mentioned how relieved the husband must feel now, that he no longer needed to rely on money that came from someone who was becoming too controlling. It was said casually, as if repeating something overheard in confidence. The husband's face drained of color, his fork dropped, and the parents didn't even flinch. A conversation had taken place. Not one, several. Suddenly, the year made sense, the strange tension, the coldness, the way the husband had started defending the parents even in situations where their behavior was clearly cruel. The late-night phone calls he claimed were work. The messages he hid by tilting his screen away. The defensive explosions whenever questions were asked. All of it was part of a slow, carefully crafted web stitched together behind the back of the very person who supported them. The father leaned forward, talking about how a man should be the provider, not someone who sits back while a woman carries the burden. The husband swallowed hard. his hands fidgeting, his jaw clenching with secrets he had never meant to reveal. He didn't defend the partner who had stood by him through everything. He didn't correct the lies. He let every insult hang in the air like a verdict he silently agreed with, and that was the final proof. The betrayal wasn't accidental. It was a choice. The husband had been feeding the parents stories, twisted fantasies about being controlled, undermined, made to feel less of a man so he wouldn't have to admit the truth, that his failures weren't caused by anyone else, that he needed the support he pretended to resent, that he relied on money he now pretended to despise. His pride was fragile, and instead of facing it, he crafted a narrative where everyone else was the villain and he was the helpless victim. The dinner that was supposed to be a simple evening turned into a revelation of everything broken. Behind every polite sentence, the parents' resentment glimmered. Behind every forced smile, the husband's deceit trembled. And beneath it all, a silent vow began forming, one that wouldn't erupt in anger or tears, but would rise quietly, carefully, with the precision of someone who finally sees the truth laid bare. Nothing would be forgotten. Nothing would be forgiven. And those who tried to erase someone's worth would soon learn how quietly, how intelligently, and how completely a person can reclaim everything that was taken. They never realized that the first crack they created would become the fracture that eventually broke them. The moment the smile began to tremble, everything else in the room seemed to fade. It was subtle at first, a tiny shift at the corner of his mouth, the kind that only appears when a lie is held too tightly and the truth pushes against the edges. He tried to cover it with a sip of water, a polite nod toward the parents, but the crack was already showing. Something inside him struggled to stay hidden, and that struggle said more than any words he could have spoken. The parents kept talking, spinning their version of righteousness, pretending their concern was genuine. Their voices were drenched in sweetness, the type that burns more than it comforts. They spoke about loyalty, respect, and family obligation, using each word like a needle meant to stitch him closer to their side and farther away from the person who had carried the weight of their household for years. But their eagerness betrayed them. They were too confident, too rehearsed, too synchronized. They weren't defending him, they were protecting something much darker. Every time the parents praised him for handling things like a real man, his jaw tightened a little more. Every time they made a passive remark about outsiders interfering with family decisions, his pulse jumped in his neck. The smile he kept forcing grew weaker, collapsing under the pressure of a truth that neither he nor his parents were prepared to expose. And each second that passed made it clearer. This wasn't just blind loyalty. This was collaboration. The alliance had been carefully built, forged and whispers exchanged when the doors were closed and lights dimmed. The late-night phone calls he dismissed as work emergencies, the sudden shifts in his attitude, the defensive anger whenever questioned, the strange confidence he displayed despite contributing so little, none of it was coincidence. The parents' approval wasn't newly earned. It was bought with secrets. His secrets. Secrets that involved money that wasn't his, choices he never admitted making, and promises spoken in hushed tones that were never meant to reach the ears of the one person who had stood by him. The truth began slipping out when the father casually mentioned a temporary loan arrangement. He said it like the weather, harmless and light, but it hit the table like a dropped glass. The husband froze for a second, eyes widening before he forced them back to normal. He laughed weakly, too loudly, the kind of laugh a person gives when they realize someone has revealed more than they should have. The mother shot the father a warning glance, confirming that the comment wasn't meant to be heard. That was the moment everything clicked. The husband had been giving money, not his own money taken quietly from joint accounts, disguised under fake expenses, hidden behind excuses of urgent bills or forgotten subscriptions. The parents knew. Not only knew, they encouraged it. They depended on it. They wanted more of it. And they made him believe that the only way to prove himself as a real man was to funnel every resource away from the household, built with love and sacrifice, and toward the toxic approval he craved from them. The mother leaned in, her voice slow and sticky, dripping with false concern. She spoke about how grateful they were that he was finally leading the family financially, a claim so outrageous it nearly twisted the air. He swallowed hard again, the smile now fully broken, replaced with a shadow of shame that flickered but refused to settle. In that brief flicker, the truth screamed louder than any confession. He had been serving two households, two loyalties, two worlds. And the one he shared with love and trust wasn't the one he chose. Behind the smirking approval of his parents was a much darker hunger control. Control over him. Control over the money. Control over the decisions made in a marriage they never respected. They had molded him slowly, feeding his insecurities, convincing him he wasn't enough unless he followed their plans. And he did. He followed them so blindly that he allowed himself to become a weapon used against the very person who believed in him. The more the parents spoke, the more pieces fell into place. They mentioned purchases he claimed he never made. They referenced conversations no one else was supposed to hear. They complimented sacrifices he pretended were hardships. Every slip exposed another layer of the alliance, revealing just how deeply manipulation had sunk its roots into their family. The husband tried to keep his face calm, but the truth clung to him like smoke. He avoided every meaningful glance, choosing instead to nod at the parents with the obedience of someone who had forgotten where loyalty truly belonged. He didn't defend the partner who had carried him. He didn't correct the lies. He didn't even flinch when the parents twisted the narrative to portray him as a victim. That silence was more revealing than any confession he could offer. The alliance between him and the parents wasn't just a betrayal. It was intentional, constructed, protected, and he had contributed to it piece by piece, feeding their greed with money and feeding their manipulation with compliance. But every alliance built on deception eventually reaches the moment where truth becomes impossible to hide. That moment had arrived, and everything inside the room shifted, because the smile he failed to maintain was more honest than anything he had ever said. And when truth slips out, even in silence, it changes everything. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like a cold draft seeping through locked windows, sliding along the spine and settling deep enough to make breathing feel different. It began with a single sentence from the mother, spoken with a sweetness so artificial it almost tasted bitter. She said the family had never relied on anything given, even though countless moments proved the opposite. She dismissed years of support with a single careless wave of her hand, as though generosity had been an inconvenience rather than a lifeline. That was when something inside the mind began piecing things together. Every memory resurfaced, not as warm recollections of helping loved ones, but as quiet warnings unnoticed at the time. The nights spent working late so bills could be paid. The sacrifices made so their celebrations, their emergencies, their needs were always met. The gifts given with love, the surprises planned with care. The endless emotional labor poured into everyone around. Everything that once felt meaningful now throbbed with the sting of being taken for granted. And each memory brought with it a new angle, a new detail that had been overlooked because trust had blinded the truth. There was the time the husband insisted his parents didn't need help, yet their fridge was mysteriously stocked after a visit. There was the night he returned from his parents' house uneasy, claiming exhaustion, but the smell of fresh paint on his shirt suggested he had done more than just rest. There were the afternoons he asked for money for emergencies, but never explained what those emergencies were. And the repeated moments when gratitude was replaced with entitlement, When kindness was met with silent expectation rather than appreciation, all of it formed a chilling pattern. None of the support had ever been respected. It had been used, absorbed, expected. The parents weren't simply ungrateful, they were strategic. They had built a comfortable dependency while pretending not to need anything. They spoke often about pride and independence, yet accepted every unspoken sacrifice with open hands. They allowed every act of kindness to become routine, a responsibility instead of a choice. And slowly, subtly, they twisted each act into something owed rather than something offered. And the husband, he wasn't just influenced by them, he participated. Every time he downplayed the help, dismissed the effort, or pretended that nothing given had real value, he was paving the way for something darker. He fed them stories and whispers, carefully rewriting the narrative until support appeared as control. Generosity looked like dominance, and every ounce of help was twisted into a threat to their family structure. That lie became their truth. The betrayal they plotted wasn't noisy. It was silent, patient, and calculated. They wanted more than just money, they wanted authority. They wanted to position themselves as the center of his world, even if it meant breaking the person who stood beside him. The parents wanted power over decisions that didn't concern them, and the husband too weak to build his own identity, too fragile to admit his reliance found comfort in surrendering to their influence. Every gift given over the years became ammunition. Every effort made to lift him up was used to convince his parents that someone else had too much control over him. Every moment of support that saved them from hardship was twisted into a weapon meant to erode dignity, independence, and worth. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It had been growing in the background, nurtured by manipulation, fueled by insecurity, and fed by every sacrifice that went unnoticed. What hurt most wasn't the ingratitude. It was the realization that they had been waiting for the right moment to turn against the very person who had held everything together. They wanted dependence to appear as weakness, generosity to look like overreach, and loyalty to seem like a burden. They wanted to sever autonomy piece by piece until nothing remained but reliance on them. And the husband had allowed it. He stood silently as his parents erased the efforts that once carried him. He let them paint a picture where he was the victim and the person who supported him was the villain. He listened as they dismissed the sacrifices that kept his life stable. And worst of all, he agreed, if not with words, then with his silence. That silence was the deepest cut, because in that quiet moment, the truth became undeniable. Love had been reciprocated with manipulation. Trust had been traded for deceit, and loyalty had been met with betrayal planned long before the realization arrived. But revelations, no matter how cold, have power. And once a person understands the truth of who stands beside them and who stands against them, everything changes. The betrayal that tried to break dignity would become the fire that rebuilt strength. The dinner table looked harmless at first glance, warm lighting, neatly placed dishes, the kind of setup meant to give an illusion of harmony. But harmony was the last thing breathing in that room. Every person sat with a stiffness that betrayed the storm beneath their calm expressions. Knives and forks scraped plates with a tension sharp enough to cut skin, and the air felt thick with the weight of truths no one dared speak aloud. The parents exchanged the first glance, quick, sharp, full of meaning. The kind of glance people send each other when rehearsed lines are about to begin. The mother complimented the cooking, but the tone was pointed, emphasizing how some people should learn what real effort looks like. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The father let out a slow, knowing chuckle, tapping his spoon against the glass in a rhythm that felt like a warning. Across the table, the husband straightened in his seat. His face tried to stay neutral, but tension pulled at the corners of his mouth. He lifted his fork as if using it to shield himself from what might slip out next. His eyes flicked toward the parents, then away, then back again, silent conversations happening without words, all just out of reach but close enough to feel. The mother spoke again, this time praising her son for being the pillar of the family, an odd comment, considering the truth of who had carried the real weight for years. She said it slowly, savoring each syllable, as if trying to force the idea into the air until it became real. The father nodded with exaggerated enthusiasm, insisting that a man must lead his home without depending on anyone else. The husband's jaw tightened. His fingers curled around his fork too tightly, knuckles turning pale. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct them, didn't acknowledge the lie. He sat there absorbing the false praise as though it fed something inside him, something fragile, insecure, desperate. The coded sentences continued. The mother said independence was important. The father added that some people give too much and expect too much. The mother laughed softly, claiming she never needed anyone's charity. The father muttered that real families stand on their own feet. Each line landed like a blow disguised as polite conversation. Then came the glance, the one that changed everything. The father shot the husband a quick, sharp look that held both impatience and warning, as if reminding him of something he had promised to keep hidden. The husband flinched just slightly, so slightly that anyone passing by would miss it. But it was enough. The mother leaned in, pretending to adjust the napkin near her plate. She whispered something under her breath, something meant only for her son. His face twitched. Guilt, fear, maybe both. He swallowed hard and nodded, eyes fixed on his plate. His silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was compliance. Every subtle insult, every carefully chosen word, every shared glance was part of a script he had agreed to play a role in. The realization burned quietly. He wasn't an observer in their cruelty. He was part of it. Not a victim, a participant. A soft chuckle from the mother broke the moment. She commented on how some people didn't know their place in a family. The father chimed in about how outsiders weaken unity. The husband finally spoke, but his voice trembled. He said everyone should try to understand each other. It was a weak attempt at balance. But it wasn't for peace. It was for hiding his fear that another truth might accidentally slip. Because beneath the politeness, cracks were spreading. Every smile the parents gave each other carried smugness. Every time the husband avoided eye contact, guilt flickered. Every silent moment was filled with the weight of something rotten. Then the mother slipped a little too confident. She mentioned how grateful she was for all the support her son provided, especially lately. The husband froze. The father shot her a quick glare as if she had gone off script. She fumbled, clearing her throat, trying to smooth over the misstep. But the damage was done. It was confirmation. Confirmation that he had been giving them something secretly. Money, time, loyalty, and hiding it. The coded sentences weren't coded anymore. The insults weren't subtle. The glances weren't invisible. Everything they tried to hide hovered over the table like smoke. The parents had been plotting. The husband had been cooperating. And the dinner wasn't a dinner at all. It was a performance meant to shift power, rewrite truth, and erase the person who had stood beside him the longest. But even the best performances crumble when the actors forget their lines. Because buried truths don't stay buried forever. And this one had already begun to rise. It began with small details, tiny inconsistencies that seemed harmless at first. A missing notification, a late-night call abruptly silenced, a bill that didn't match the spending pattern of any normal day. All of it could have been ignored, brushed aside, explained with a tired smile or a half-hearted excuse. But once a person begins paying attention, Even the smallest irregularity becomes a clue pointing toward a much darker truth. The husband had always insisted on handling finances with trust and transparency. At least that was the image he liked to present. But behind the forced calm, behind the polite assurances, there was a quiet desperation that didn't belong to a man with nothing to hide. His phone grew heavier in his hands, guarded like a secret he couldn't afford to let go. His tone shifted whenever certain names appeared on the screen. His mood changed with every message he pretended wasn't important. The truth surfaced slowly, like debris from a sinking ship rising one piece at a time. First came the financial discrepancies, small withdrawals disguised as household expenses. Then larger sums labeled as urgent repairs or unexpected bills. The descriptions were vague, intentionally so. The timing matched suspicious patterns, aligning perfectly with the parents' sudden change in lifestyle. New furnishings, paid off loans, unexplained upgrades they credited to careful saving, even though their habits had never reflected anything close to discipline or restraint. Then came the emotional shifts. The husband grew colder, more distant, not in dramatic bursts of anger, but through subtle manipulations, small jabs disguised as jokes. Dismissive comments passed off as harmless observations. Conversations twisted until the person listening began questioning their own perception. He wielded silence as a weapon, withdrawing affection whenever confronted, offering it back only when compliance returned. It was calculated, practiced, intentional. The manipulation didn't end there. He began echoing phrases that didn't sound like his own sentences, dripping with the parents' influence. Words about family duty and understanding one's place, carefully fed into him until he could repeat them without hesitation. His newfound confidence was not his own. It was borrowed from the approval of those who had been manipulating him long before the truth came to light. But the real unraveling began when the hidden communication surfaced. Late-night calls disguised as work emergencies. Deleted messages leaving blank spaces in conversation history. Emails flagged as important but never opened in plain sight. A pattern formed, one that pointed directly to the parents. They weren't just involved. They were orchestrating everything with the precision of people who had been planning long before anyone suspected a thing. Each message revealed a new layer of deceit. Advice from the mother on how to handle the situation. Encouragement from the father telling him he deserved better. Words laced with poison, feeding his insecurities until he believed betrayal was justified. The conspiracy was bigger than money, bigger than influence. It was designed to crush the heart that had supported him without conditions, to convince him that loyalty was weakness and that the person who cared for him most was somehow the enemy he needed to escape. The parents pulled the strings, but he held them willingly. He wasn't trapped, he was compliant. He offered information freely, shared private conversations, exaggerated conflicts, and painted himself as a victim needing rescue. He allowed them to twist the narrative, shaping him into someone who viewed kindness as control and sacrifice as manipulation. Piece by piece, the truth became undeniable. The financial dealings were not mistakes, they were deliberate transfers. The emotional manipulation wasn't accidental, it was rehearsed. The hidden communications were not misunderstandings, they were secret plans crafted to weaken the one who believed in him. He had been working with them, not against them. They wanted to isolate the person who held their fragile world together, strip away independence, and reshape loyalty into dependency on them. They wanted control over decisions that weren't theirs to make, and he let them take it. He didn't resist. He didn't protect. He didn't hesitate. He betrayed. But conspiracies built on deceit always eventually collapse under the weight of their own lies. And once the truth emerges, even in fragments, the entire structure begins to crumble. Because when intentions are exposed, so is the heart behind them. And his heart had already exposed itself. The shift didn't happen with dramatic anger or raised voices. It settled in quietly, the way a final breath settles before a storm. One moment, everything felt suffocating betrayal cutting through the room like blunt knives. Truths buried under lies, and a marriage twisted into something unrecognizable. But then something shifted. A calmness stirred beneath the chaos, not peaceful but sharp. Focus, cold enough to freeze the trembling that had been living beneath the ribs for far too long. That was the exact moment revenge took root. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with threats or tears. It arrived without a word, slipping into the mind like a blade sliding into its sheath, silent, deadly, and certain of its purpose. While they believed their power was complete, while they gloated behind polite smiles and soft insults, something stronger formed in the silence. A resolve built not out of anger, but clarity. A clarity that sees people exactly as they are. The husband sat across the table, pretending to be neutral while secretly aligning with the parents, convinced he had mastered deception. His face carried the arrogance of someone who believed betrayal could go unnoticed, simply because it was done quietly. The parents seemed content, too sure of their victory, exchanging smug glances that revealed how deeply their conspiracy had rooted itself. They didn't notice the calm forming on the other side of the table. They didn't see the shift in eyes. They didn't feel the temperature drop, but it was there growing. The parents continued speaking, their words carrying venom wrapped in courtesy. The father lectured about responsibility, about knowing one's place in the family. The mother added her rehearsed lines about independence, about how support should never become control. Their voices blended into a dull hum, their confidence unshaken by the possibility that their plot was unraveling faster than they realized. The husband's nodding became mechanical. He thought his silence disguised complicity. He believed loyalty could be faked as easily as a smile, but every movement he made, every forced breath, revealed more of the truth he was trying so desperately to conceal. That truth didn't wound anymore. It fueled something else. The revenge taking root wasn't about destruction, not yet. It wasn't about shouting or accusations or emotional collapse. It was about reclaiming something that had been quietly stolen. Dignity, control, power. It was about letting their confidence grow just long enough for their downfall to be satisfying. Revenge wasn't going to be wild. It was going to be calculated. There would be no impulsive moves. No messy confrontations, no emotional outbursts to give them more ammunition. Instead, there would be patience, sharp, methodical patience, the kind that watches people expose themselves without needing any push, the kind that allows lies to tangle until they choke the liar, the kind that waits for the perfect moment when truth will slice clean through the illusions they've built. Because the first step wasn't to fight back, it was to observe. The husband thought his secrets were cleverly hidden, but the more he believed he was safe, the more careless he became. The parents thought their manipulations were subtle, but the more confident they grew, the more they slipped names revealed, dates mixed up, financial comments made too openly, praise given too precisely at the wrong moments. Every slip became a thread to pull. And one by one, those threads would unravel everything. The transformation began quietly, not outside, but within. A different kind of strength settled in a strength that didn't seek approval, didn't beg for clarity, didn't need explanations. A strength that understood truth always returns, and when it does, it never arrives softly. The husband's betrayal became a blueprint. The parents' arrogance became a guide. Their combined deception became the foundation for a plan that would show them exactly what it meant to underestimate the person who had supported them the most. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about letting them destroy themselves with the very lies they created. Nothing needed to be rushed. Nothing needed to be announced. Nothing needed to be shown, not yet. They had built their power on illusion, and illusions crumble fastest under silence. Because the moment revenge takes root quietly is the same moment the powerful begin preparing their own downfall without even knowing it. And this time, every hidden truth would return not softly, not slowly, but with the force of everything they believed they could get away with. If this story gripped your heart and sent chills through your thoughts, make sure to hit like, tap, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next twist in this world of hidden truths and unforgettable revenge. Your support keeps these powerful stories alive, so stay with us, stay alert, and stay ready, because the next betrayal is already unfolding.